I'm back with more about Stiff, The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers, a book wrote by Mary Roach, an American author. This time, I'll be sharing a summary of a few chapters with you and raising a few questions about a few things I think need to be discussed. The human head is a terrible thing to waste. Practicing surgery on the dead is the first chapter. This chapter takes us to the lab of a southern teaching hospital where we are face to face with 40 freshly decapitated and draped heads lined up in roasting pans. Plastic surgeons are practicing facelifts, nose jobs, and reconstructive surgery on those heads. The author informs us that live surgery is the worst place to practice surgery, while most teaching takes place in the OR and has been that way until very recently. In the 19th century, surgeries were literally live. They took place in theaters and were performed in the absence of anesthesia, no anesthetics. Patients were blindfolded in their full clothing while operated on. Surgeons shared the same rank as barbers. Nepotism rather than skill ruled the profession of surgery. Teaching medical schools practice on the poor and have been practicing on the poor even when the benefit was incidental until very recently, and this practice might be still going on, by the way. In this chapter, the author introduces the reader, or rather prepares the reader, to what is to unfold later chapters by using culinary imagery that starts with seeing the heads in roasting pans, to her description of ham-handed folk in waistcoats with their hands up your urinary tract, etc. The author also raises a few seriously ethical questions in this chapter and along the book. And in this chapter, we meet the first of these questions, and it's about practicing plastic surgery on the heads. People willed their bodies to science because they wanted to help improve the lives of the ones that stayed behind. They were kind and even heroes when they willingly did so. But would kind Southerners, for example, as she put it, have done so had they known their heads would be used for practicing nose jobs? Then the author kind of caught up with herself and said that, well, plastic surgery is out there, and those people weld their bodies to make lives of others better. And whether it's organ transplant or facelift jobs, there is no difference. They decided to leave their bodies in the hand of science, and they can do with that whatever they can do with it. Chapter 2, Crimes of Anatomy, Body Snatching, and Other Sordid Tales from the dawn of dissection. This chapter starts with the memorial service offered by the anatomy students of San Francisco Medical School in honors of the remains of cadavers they used in their labs. About 20 plus remains of what used to be bodies, which denoted kind of a change in medical school's attitude towards donated bodies. They adopted a more respectful attitude. And to highlight and bring into focus this kind of change, this positive change, the author takes us back in time, 300 BC. For example, Alexandrian Egypt, King Ptolemy performed an allowed dissection on criminals. It was a time when mummification was a common post-mortem procedure, and Ptolemy issued a decree to dissect executed criminals. He himself had a hand-on practice on those bodies. Herophilus, a Greek physician known as the father of anatomy, dissected the human cadavers and also was reported to have vivisected 600 prisoners. Vivisection is dissecting people while they are alive, not cadavers. Dissecting executed criminals is a practice also that has lasted until recent centuries and became fiercer in the 18th and 19th century when private schools in England have become popular. People did not donate bodies because of a religious stance. The only option available by decree was the Anatomy Act in England that allowed dissection on executed criminals. Anatomists, therefore, have been ranked as the same as executioners in the eye of the public. Dissection was considered punishment by the people, especially when dual sentencing has become in fact. There was a law that says if you kill a man, you will be executed and dissected. Shortage of available human remains because of people not donating their cadavers for dissection has led to graveyard crimes and others of the sort. Medical students raided graveyards to snatch bodies or paid others to dig up human bodies for anatomy instructors or students to take to anatomy instructors. We are told students did so to gain late entry to medical school or to pay some of the expenses, and also for their studies. The author mentioned the anatomy of a resurrectionist, which is an anonymous book that talks about this clandestine profession, the profession of digging up cadavers and selling them. Lowlives, petty criminals, vagabonds, prostitutes, etc. were easy prey for murderers who sold their cadavers to anatomists and their students. Anatomy labs were compared to abattoirs, charnel houses where stench filled the nostrils, and dogs, vultures, and rats have free way to human flesh. Anatomists in those days were also reported to have made spermaceti-like substances out of cooked bones and human flesh to make candles and soap. We are reminded that the purpose of this very stenchy image is to bring into focus the change in attitude in handling human remains in medical school anatomy labs, from utter disrespect to the thankful, respectful memorial, as we have seen at the beginning of the chapter, where this service was attended also by some of the families to bid farewell to whatever remains of their own. Strangely enough, and when we think the horrors ended, the author brought to light a very recent history of murders in the name of medicine quoted to have happened in Colombia in 1990s. A garbage scavenger escaped an attempt of murder when he woke up soaked in formaldehyde and sparked an investigation by activists that revealed many other murders of indigent and other disposable people whose bodies were handed to anatomy medicine labs. Given all the horrors that happened in the name of anatomy, the author goes back to ask the question, is human dissection necessary? The same question the British Parliament asks when the epidemic of anatomy crimes flared. Galen, for example, we're taken back to those times when Galen, for example, never dissected human bodies, but dissected many animals and relied on body diagrams and illustrations, yet his anatomy books were the holy book in medical studies for centuries. Confucius forbade human dissection. Huan Tai, the father of Chinese medicine, wrote his I CHII, the canon of medicine. He described how the heart is in control of the blood and circulation, and how blood flows in a continuous circle. Something that was not discovered until centuries and centuries later by William Harvey in the 17th century. And William Harvey was able to do so by dissecting human bodies. Hippocrates did not dissect human bodies, but he referred to tendons as nerves and described the human brain as a mucus secreting gland. Vesalius stood out with his De Humani Corpore Fabrica across centuries as an anatomy authority. He dissected many cadavers, had to present the sum of his hand-on experience to generations to come. Gross anatomy labs are no longer what they used to be, we are said. They no longer dissect a whole cadaver, but isolated sections of cadavers. The author also rang an alarm in the reader's ears. If people continue to will their bodies to medical schools and hospitals, at this modern rate, will end up with surplus. And she found out the reason for this recent disposition is the organ transplant surgeries, the benefit they present for patients, and the act that was passed to allow such surgeries to happen. Also, what pushed into this direction of willing to give one's body rather than something else was the rise of funeral expenses and the turn to bodies, cremation,